This is Isaiah's dream, life brought to life. With whatever joyful noise we make, we announce to the world that we do not belong to the powers of destruction and death. We belong to the God of life, the God who gives new life, because God is wherever people are completely alive. You can tell it by the music they make.
The Reverend Bill Carter has served as pastor of the First Presbyterian Church of Clark Summit since 1990. He earned a philosophy degree at Binghamton University, and he went on to Princeton Theological Seminary to prepare for the ministry. But he is also an esteemed jazz pianist who back in 1993 formed a jazz ensemble called the Presbybop Quartet that has a number of critically acclaimed CDs and which tours regularly around the country. Reverend Carter tells us on a new DVD, the Bible has some noisy scenes. One of them is in the book of 1 Samuel. Saul has been secretly anointed as the first king of Israel. The prophet Samuel foretells some odd strangers that Saul will encounter. The text reads, "After that you shall come to Gibeath Elohim, at the place where the Philistine garrison is. There, as you come to the town, you will meet a band of prophets coming down from the shrine, with harp, tambourine, flute, and lyre playing in front of them. They will be in a prophetic frenzy. Then the Spirit of the Lord will possess you, and you will be in a prophetic frenzy along with them, and be turned into a different person. Now when these signs meet you, do whatever you see fit to do, for God is with you." Those words from 1 Samuel. The Reverend Carter explains, "It's an amazing scene for me because musicians get out of hand. Not a timid organist in that bunch. Neither were they bearded guitarists playing soft rock and roll and calling it contemporary. No, it is a band of itinerant prophets. They are consumed by the high-voltage power of their music. They refuse to tone it down or play it safe. Harp, tambourine, flute, and lyre. Sounds like the first jazz quartet." That from a new DVD titled Jazz Belongs in Church, produced by Bill Carter and Presbybop Music. Carter teamed up with another Presbyterian minister, Jeff Kellam, a jazz aficionado, to capture a jazz worship service commentary and more and prepare this DVD. They paid a visit to the WVIA studios to talk with us about the project. The Reverend Bill Carter.
We have produced a DVD called Jazz Belongs in Church. It's a 2-hour DVD. The second hour is a live jazz worship service from First Presbyterian Church in Clark Summit, where I have been for over 20 years. And we do this on Labor Day weekend every year. And last year, we convinced George Graham to take a weekend and come up and spend it in mountainous Clark Summit. And he brought the WVIA special van with the special microphones and the special attendants. We ran cables past the communion table, and we recorded our sextet with our singer Warren Cooper. And we documented this on film as well.
Digital, right. That's right.
And is the idea not just that we who are viewing the DVD might be inspired, but that it might light a spark in the churches around?
One could hope for that. Whatever spark we might ignite would be wonderful, but more beyond that, any way that we can get religious people to begin thinking creatively about the arts, particularly creative improvisational arts, we're all for it. So my congregation has been a willing guinea pig now for 22 years, and every year a number of occasions will emerge where jazz musicians will wander into the church, always invited, always welcome, and they literally blow the roof off the place.
I remember coming to Clark Summit because I'd heard Bill was doing a service on Labor Day, Sunday, and I remember coming, and ordinarily you get there with a couple of minutes to spare. Well, I got there almost too late to find a seat. This is the only church I've ever seen that has a full house on Labor Day Sunday, and trying to find a place to sit or to park. And I didn't make that mistake again. So it's a very popular service.
And what's your experience of this kind of integration of the improvisatory in the worship?
Well, Bill and I are both Presbyterian pastors, and we have in common jazz. Bill plays jazz piano. I play jazz CDs. But as a pastor, I had a jazz service in Richmond, Virginia, at the church where I was the associate pastor. I served a church in Trumansburg. We had a jazz service there. In fact, when I retired, the last service, we brought in a jazz group to do a jazz service. So the integration of jazz and worship for praise and lament, I mean, it just speaks to all of the emotions, and in a far deeper way than some of the more routine music that we would use ordinarily on a Sunday. And I have to be careful what I say. My wife is a church musician, and she is not a jazz musician, but she honors that tradition. And so the two of us, I go to her organ concert, she goes to my jazz concerts.
And I first met Jeff on the airwaves. I had been given a couple of cassettes of a show that he was doing called The Spirit of Jazz, where it was, late Sunday night kind of thing?
Depended on the market.
Right, and he would reflect a little bit on what was going on in his own soul as he listened to the music and the way that others could participate and play some great cuts. And then later on, I was shocked to open a magazine and discover that he wrote the first review to my very first CD, and we had never met.
Yeah, and then we did meet at a preacher's conference, and then you organized a conference called Jazz in the Church,
yep.
And Dave Brubeck was invited to come and receive an award for his sacred jazz. And it was a wonderful occasion when many folks from either the church or from the jazz community came together and enjoyed Brubeck, his stories and his music.
Bill, when was the first time you were touched in a way by jazz, when it really spoke to you?
I can recall a number of occasions. My mother had all kinds of 78s and 33s. And Fats Waller, Benny Goodman, the original quartet with Lionel Hampton and Teddy Wilson, all kinds of great musicians. And she had this available. She told stories also of how Louis Armstrong came to her hometown in western Pennsylvania with a stack of handkerchiefs on top of the upright piano. And as he played, he would take a handkerchief, wipe his brow, and just keep going. And there was kind of a reverence for the creativity and thinking through where the source came. There have been many occasions where I've experienced that transcendent power, but that was probably where it first began.
How about you?
Well, my story is somewhat similar. The first music I was exposed to was my parents' old shellac 78s from the World War II era. So the first music I remember hearing fall down on that changer, that terrible click when those records would come down. It was Benny Goodman. It was Harry James and the Dorsey Brothers. So that was the first music I listened to. When I went to college, I went to Westminster College in Pennsylvania and had an opportunity to go on the radio there, and I did a big band show. So that exposed me to everybody from Ted Heath to Stan Kenton, and that became my favorite music. My dad always said, jazz sounds like everyone's playing a different song all at the same time. But I had a little bit more love for it than he did, but no musical genes with which to make music myself.
What would you do on the radio in the show that Bill was just telling us about?
Well, it was taking secular jazz cuts, contemporary jazz, and then just choosing a theme. Choose the theme of the nighttime. And you can find lots of music about night. And it was only a half hour, so I would build meditations based on each of those songs. And it was syndicated around the country in various markets. And so the mail would come in and people would suggest themes. Why don't you, if you've done one on night, you should do one on morning, and so on. And it was great fun, very creative, and it allowed me to do some writing as well as playing some music.
My mother is an amateur watercolor painter. And I remember one day she told me the most important part of the painting is the frame, if not the matting, because it calls out what you want to see in the center. And if you have a frame or a matting around a piece of music, it also gives you a chance to understand and merge more deeply into it.
Now, is there conversation or any remarks in this DVD?
Oh,
I'm afraid we can't get away from them. Bill is quite verbose, and Perhaps you've noticed.
Yeah, it's a 2-hour DVD. The first 5 segments, all about 10 or 12 minutes apiece, have some aspect of what jazz is, how it functions, how it affects us, and then how it can be involved in church. So that's kind of the progression. And all of it's interspersed with live music recorded on tour, filmed on tour, by Jeff, who accompanied us last fall on a tour of North Carolina.
And that was such a big thing for me to be able to say, I'm with the band, you know.
Right.
So whenever we went into a church in Virginia, North Carolina, people would say, may I help you? They'd see me carrying something in, and I'd say, I'm with the band. Right. But it was wonderful to see that music in different places other than Bill's church, or Bill's home church, where I've seen you play, or my church in Endicott, where I've seen you play. Now suddenly we're playing in a contemporary sanctuary or a very Gothic sanctuary, and to watch people come in and then go out with you can just see the light in their eyes. And what we heard often was, well, I came to church, you know, I don't really like jazz, but I really like this. 2 or 3 times there were these conversion experiences.
And when the music is indigenous to the people, when it comes from within their interest, their passion, their concern, then it inhabits that space all the more. And a couple of places where we play, it is definitely a special event. They bring us in. They're glad to see us go. But if in any way this takes up lodging in that community of faith, among those people in that place, it's all the more opportunity for the holy powers of the universe to be at work in these people, to kind of call it forth. It gives them an opportunity to be honest about their lives. It gives them an opportunity to lift up toward the sky anything that's going on, an opportunity to voice their pain, but also to tap their foot and to be caught up in a larger dance than they are normally caught in.
And I have to add, too, that Bill also frames many of the compositions for the congregation so that we're not just sitting in on a jazz concert. So jazz can be used as part of the normal liturgy, as it would be on Labor Day at your church. Mm-hmm. And we did do a couple of Sunday morning services,
right.
But there were also some evening services where, rather than just playing one song after another, Bill would set the scene with some poetry. Mm-hmm. So you were doing with these things what I was doing on the radio.
Right.
It just fit very nicely together.
Yeah, there seems to be, or there needs to be a rhythm between the spoken word and the listened experience, so that we have some conversation, at least within our souls or among us, about what we're experiencing musically and what this might mean for our lives. And that's part of what I want to do with my life, is to raise that conversation so that the musicians are honored for the depth and also that people are enriched by what they hear.
And when you mentioned the musicians, you all are listening to each other, respecting each other. It's like not just a community, but couldn't we use the word communion?
Oh, very much so. Yeah. Very much so. Our band has been together for 20 years. This will be our 20th year coming up. And we've had one personnel change in that time. And because of that, the ability for us to get along, understand one another, communicate without words is at a very high level. And so the trust between us, if someone's going to take a risk, the others will sit back sometimes, arms crossed in glee, and see, let's see what you do with this. Or they'll provide the safety net, lest you go off the rope.
That's really what we would like to be for each other in our lives.
Yes, and to know that there is diversity within the quartet or the larger ensemble. It's just a given, so we have to get along, and that only comes through respect, by paying attention to one another, by learning enough about one another's habits that we can respect and also give permission to be who they are in an individual, but do this all, in a sense, in a bond of community. So is it music or is it something beyond that? Yes.
Yeah. It is both cerebral in many ways, but it's also quite heartfelt. And I think there are some churches that do heart very, very well, and there are other churches that do the word. They are the people of the word. But I think this kind of jazz brings those two pieces together, and that's a communion as well.
I remember Wynton Marsalis saying one time he wanted to go where musicians would perspire. And what he wanted was to experience some kind of energizing, powerful force at work in the musical moment. That's where he wanted to be. And it couldn't be merely calculated or detached or almost scientific, but thoroughly participatory, and the word I like is visceral. Mm-hmm. It has to be visceral. It has to call forth who we are as human beings.
It becomes more than the sum of the parts.
I think so. One of my concerns as a pastor is in seeing those people who are only interested in following the script without any life in it, whether the script is a liturgy or some kind of set of static beliefs that they think are timeless, but nothing takes on skin and bone and flesh and blood. It's not lived out. There's nothing passionate about it, and there's no opportunity for interruption by, again, the holy powers of the universe. I mean, when do we encounter beauty? When do we encounter a sense of being together for common purposes? Music can model this for people, and not only call it forth, but practice it right there. And that's so much more enriching for me than to simply go and be given my worship bulletin, take a pencil and put a little tick mark past everything on the agenda that we've just survived. I want to thoroughly be part of what's going on. There are outdated and incorrect ideas that jazz is somehow some kind of secular music, or that it's pagan music, or it's sinful music. I can say, after working at this for a while, the line between sacred and secular is always a dotted line, and one affects the other, infects the other, and that's where the real excitement is, when you see how the sacred parts of your life might affect the things that you thought were secular.
Mm-hmm. I'm recalling now, back in my rock and roll days, I interviewed Curtis Mayfield, who was with the group called The Impressions. And after the show, I said, "Now, where does this music come from?" He said, "We all come from the church." And so the rhythm and blues music that he was such a talented genius in, I mean, just wonderful music from Curtis Mayfield, he's giving the credit to the spirituality that he felt in his church on Sunday mornings. And I think that jazz, certainly as America's indigenous popular music, certainly has its roots in the spiritual, in the blues. I mean, you follow many years ago, the Music Educators Journal had a family tree of America's popular music. And at the top, at that time, was rap and that kind of thing, you know. And then you follow the roots on down, and there at the bottom, you're following jazz, blues, and then it gets to the spiritual. And, Bill calls this Jazz Belongs in Church. If I were doing a radio show, I'd call it Jazz Goes Back to Church, because I think that's pretty much where it came from.
Right. Is this really hot off the presses?
It is. Our big introduction was at the National Convention of the Presbyterians, which was in Pittsburgh in early July of this year. But our local rollout is going to be the 21st Annual Jazz Communion on the first Sunday of September. First Presbyterian Church, 300 School Street, Clark Summit, 10 o'clock, but get there at 9:30 unless you want to stand.
Well, you also want to hear the music that leads up to the service.
Well, there is that.
And it's not going to stop an hour later. The music will go on after the service. Right. So you're getting a couple of hours maybe.
In similar way, we do a Christmas Eve service with a jazz band at the church. The shepherds in bathrobes are there to do the pageant at 6:30. The Magi show up in their blue choir gowns to sing British carols at 9. And 11 o'clock, here come the swinging shepherds. And Marco Marcinko and Tony Marino and our friend Mike Carbone come in. And again, we defrost the place. And the service goes for an hour and 40 minutes, and nobody moves because everybody's moving.
I want to point out, too, that along with the Jazz Project on DVD, the Jazz Belongs in Church Project, there is a 54-page study guide for the DVD that helps you understand the 7 joys of jazz, the ways to welcome jazz in church. some questions and answers, very practical material. And Bill's not selling that. It's online now.
It's for free as a PDF file on the website, which is presbybop.com, presbybop, as in Paul.com.
And it was produced by a couple of church educators who are curriculum writers. So Bill and I didn't sit down and try to write this down on a legal pad and then scan it. So it's been professionally put together.
And they've included transcripts from some of the spoken material, some background material that we couldn't quite shoehorn into the project, some sheet music, a little discography of other musicians who have integrated both worlds. And so we're hoping this becomes a useful resource for people, as well as something fun to watch.
Now, introduce us to the players.
To the players. Well, Al Hom is my college music professor, and we hooked up again when I moved back to Clark Summit 22 years ago. Tony Marino is the monster man on bass, Mr. Creativity. We're going to actually, hopefully, with the proceeds from this project, make a Tony Marino bobblehead doll. Ron Vincent is the drummer who's been with us since 2004. He was the last drummer for Jerry Mulligan. Then we have special friends. We have the gospel singer Warren Cooper, who comes up from Philadelphia. He has a Sunday gospel show on WRTI-FM, our second favorite radio station. Jeff Stockham shows up now and then playing the trumpet and also the French horn. Michael Carbone will play the saxophones as well. And I don't know who else might be on the DVD, but that's kind of the core group. And we travel all over the country doing things, mostly during my time off from the church.
And I think it must say something that these are musicians who go off and play in clubs and things like that, but they keep coming back to this. There must be something very special about this.
Well, I think so. One of my favorite moments in the DVD is a brief little video clip I took of David Liebman, the NEA jazz master who lives in nearby Stroudsburg. He was doing a concert for about 20 people at North Pocono High School, and we were talking backstage, and he breaks into talking about the transcendent power of playing jazz. And when you're playing jazz, baby, he said, you're among the spheres. I mean, he gets it, he understands it, and he imparts that to people like me.
And speaking of that, I think to go back to the roots and to realize that Dave Brubeck did jazz in the church. Duke Ellington, Mary Lou Williams.
Mary Lou Williams, absolutely, was running a homeless shelter, was assisting musicians who were hungry and had addictions, was part of the Catholic worker movement, I believe, and was a great pianist and composer that Duke Ellington thought, well, when Mary Lou comes in the room, nobody else needs to be here. She's it. And she lived out that integration of sacred and secular.
You've used a number of very important images for us in this conversation, and one is the dotted line.
Yep. And my observation is that a lot of my jazz musician friends have been put off by the church. They find it repressive at times, confining, a little too stiff. Some of the volunteers are just a little too attentive or too uptight. Of course, none of these people go to my church. But at the same time, the church folk, while their faith may be aflame, they don't know what to do with the actual experience of creativity and power in their midst, which was curious to me that jazz emerged in America about the same time as Pentecostalism. And historically, the movement was very similar, that everything moved off the page and into the air. And there are people who have tried to make that connection. John Coltrane's later music was inspired by the Pentecostalism that he experienced as the grandson of two ministers.
And one of my favorite jazz moments in church was at St. Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. I happened to be there when their first, and perhaps as far as I know, only jazz Vespers was held. And they played Coltrane's A Love Supreme. And one of my favorite visual images, I don't like to take pictures other than for this video project in church. I find it distracting. But I had to sneak a picture of this sax player in the midst of a Love Supreme with this ornate, beautiful pulpit behind him, carved in stone, where the kind of John Knox, the father of Presbyterianism, preached, and to see that saxophone wailing, and the juxtaposition was just, it's a perfect, I think, symbol of the way the church is awake and alive to these new images and sounds.
Right. That's right. People are concerned, will the traditions that we experience in our churches now continue into next generation? I think the church is alive and well, but you have to know where the life is, and you have to seek it out. Yeah. And it's probably not going to be in the places where we've always are doing the same thing we've always been doing before, but the places where folks will take some risks, and they'll be honest about their pain and their joy, and they'll live this out together in community. One of the things I kind of blurted out in the DVD that I have repeated 1,000 times. I mean, this is the danger. A preacher says something once, and you're going to hear it 1,000,000 times more. This life is the only spiritual life we have. There is no other. This life that goes on from this point forward, maybe forever, this is the spiritual life we have. So to be aware and awakened to the spiritual power here and now means to live honestly and completely right here in this moment.
Reverend Bill Carter, pastor of the First Presbyterian Church of Clark Summit, jazz pianist, leader of the presbybop quartet, with friend and colleague Reverend Jeff Kellam, also a Presbyterian pastor from Owego, New York, speaking with us about their collaboration, a new DVD titled Jazz Belongs in Church, in anticipation of the 21st annual Labor Day weekend jazz service at the First Presbyterian Church of Clark Summit, Sunday, September 2nd, getting underway at 10 a.m., 300 School Street in Clark Summit. This year's event will celebrate the release of this new DVD. If you attend the service, you're advised to arrive early. For more information on the web, presbybop.com, and that's Presbybop, presbybop.com. Jazz Belongs in Church, a new DVD produced by Bill Carter and Presbybop Music. For more information on the web, presbybop.com, presbybop.com, in anticipation of the 21st annual Labor Day weekend jazz service at the First Presbyterian Church of Clark Summit, 300 School Street, Sunday, September 2nd at 10 a.m.
So go from this place with a dance in your step and a song in your heart. And may the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the power of the Holy Spirit bring you completely alive now and forever.
The Reverend Bill Carter and the Presbybop Sextet, and that's part of Jazz Belongs in Church, presbybop.com. You're tuned to Art Scene on WVIA. We have Bach, arranged by Bill Carter and performed by Bill Carter and the Presbybop Quartet, from the group's Dancing Day CD, Jesu Joy of Man's Desiring, on WVIA.